So for those of you in my classes and who are using JS objects, let's go ahead and talk about the most recent version of ElfDebug Enzyme that I just updated on April 27th. First, let's make sure you have the most recent copy. So use our get gist, which is part of JS objects, to grab it, and that gets you a copy of it. We just chose B from the menu, and that got ElfDebug Enzyme for us. And then once we have it, we can start working on our tests. And right now all our tests are passing. But let's suppose in our carelessness we accidentally made a change to our text. Now when we look at it, we can see that a failure occurred. We can see it occurred on line 24 of our test, but we don't know exactly what the error is. So if we go to our test, we know it occurred right here on line 24, but we don't know what the error is. At this stage, we're importing ElfDebug Enzyme, and we're creating an instance of it, and we've set show me the output to false. We've specified the name of the file that we're testing, and we have another option here that we'll talk about in just a second. So the reason we don't see any output from it is because we have ElfDebug Enzyme set, output set to false. So let's set it to true. And now all of a sudden you can start to see the ElfDebug Enzyme output out here, and you can see exactly what it is we're creating. And perhaps we could look here and notice this string and see that that there's a difference, right? So then it becomes fairly easy for us to fix our code, okay? And now we're back to having it work, and we might want to stop looking at the debug enzyme output because we're going, okay, I got that part of it fixed. So we can come back up here and set it back to false. And now all is good. But let's go back into app.js and make another kind of change. And let's suppose we want to work with a header 2 instead of a header 1. Suppose we made that change. And we come back here and the thing fails, and again we don't have a very clear idea of why it failed. And we can come back over here and we can say I want to start seeing the output, and so the question is, why are we not seeing it? There's really only one reason why we couldn't see it, and that's because our attempt to find it is failing. We're asking ElfDebug Enzyme to find the first H1 element, and if it can't find the first H1 element, that must be because there isn't an H1 element in there. So we could ask it to, there are two ways to solve the problem. We could say find the first H2 element, and here we start to see the output, right? But that's not really what we want, because you don't want to change your test. Your tests show what you want it to be. Instead, you need to come over here and change your code. And now we can start, two things happen. One, we see the output here, and B, we also see that our tests are passing. So then the other thing we can do here is that we can say, show me an alternative view of this. And if we do this, then our view of it is different than we were getting before. Rather than showing the HTML that's being generated, we're seeing more like a syntax tree of that HTML. We can see that it's an H1, that it's got a class name element, and it's got some children, which is a text. Sometimes this view can be more useful than the other, so just take your pick. Sometimes maybe you'll see one thing one way and one thing the other way. Now, while we're on the subject, notice that you could do, in this case, we only have one H1 element in here, so it will also be the last element in there. So we can find it by going get last. Get first or get last would work. Or we could say, let's find it by index. Suppose if you've got one element or two elements, get first and guess last will work. But if you have 5 elements, get first and guess last won't work if you're trying to look for, say, the third element. So choose get element by index, and let's go for the 0th element in here in this case, since we only have one. Let's go for the 0th element. And now you can see that too will be a way of retrieving information. What I'm trying to show you is that you've got multiple ways to try to find the one you're looking for, the item that you're looking for in your code. There's only one other thing I want to show you. Notice that I'm bringing in debug in here, and I give a string that we can use to help us turn on debug for this module. And in ElfDebug Enzyme, I also bring in debug, and there's a string you can use to activate the debug module inside of ElfDebug Enzyme. So we'll go to the shell for a second, choose Q for quit, and we'll do export debug equals, and we'll paste in those two strings, ElfDebug Enzyme, app test enzyme. Remember again where we're getting them from. We're getting them from here, and we're getting them from here, right? We're adding those strings to the environment variable called debug. And because we do that, when we run our test, we start seeing some additional information that we weren't seeing before. Here we're seeing the output from ElfDebug Enzyme and app test enzyme in this format. So it helps us see, oh, the type is H1, the props have got a class name, got a children. This can be helpful sometimes if you make a mistake like this. If you say forget to put the class name on it, then when you compare them, it's maybe easy to see that there's a difference here. You can see that the props look different than these props. It's just because they're right next to each other. They're fairly easy to compare. I'm doing this because I have a lot of experience with this with students, and they tend to have trouble seeing the difference, and I'm trying to make it easier for you to find it. So let's go back in here and fix our bug. Then we come back. Now we're getting both tests are passing, but we've got too much debug information coming out. So we can just go, well, let's do it this way. Just get rid of the statements set debug equal to nothing. Start our test again. Now we're getting a lot less output, but we still don't need this anymore since it's now passing. So we come back in here to our tests, and we say, let's stop seeing output. And now when we run it, we just see the tests and everything's back to normal. The only other thing I can think of to say about this is that the updated version of ElfDebug Enzyme relies on Chalk. So if you don't have Chalk installed, on Create React App, you'll find that it's installed automatically. But if it's not installed automatically and you get error messages about Chalk, do npm i-d chalk. As you can see, this is written in here in multiple places in ElfDebug Enzyme itself. So if you forget how to solve the problem, come over here and see if you can fix it. I'll fake what it might look like if you can't find it. So there's no chalka. So now you're getting an error messages and it says cannot find module chalka. It would of course say chalk on yours, in which case you would have to run it. And you down here, I actually in my error message figured out a way to show you the command to do it. So perhaps you could figure it out and you would run npm i-d chalk, and then just as it would have the same effect, all of a sudden things would be clean and it would start working again. All right. Thanks.